In this video, we'll be taking a look at 3 NBA games happening on December 8th, 2025, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 6 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released, so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 3 NBA games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start: if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Sacramento Kings versus Indiana Pacers. Sacramento and Indiana walking into this one feel a bit like two teams looking at each other in the mirror, both trying to remember what winning basketball actually looks like. The records tell the story in a pretty blunt way. Sacramento sitting at a rough 6-17 out west, and Indiana crawling along at around 5-18 in the east. Neither side is exactly screaming contender status right now. That is important because when the market still hands one of these groups the favorite tag at home and nudges the spread a few points in their direction, you have to ask if it is pricing reputation more than reality. Here is the thing: Sacramento is not some wild, chaotic run-and-gun outfit anymore. They are closer to a middle-of-the-road tempo team that plays at about a league average pace and scoreline. They are putting up roughly the low 100 teens per night, hitting threes at a very normal clip, and mostly living in that safe, beige space between explosive and ugly. It sounds boring, but that kind of stability matters when you are catching points. Indiana, on the other hand, is walking around with the glow of a recent deep run still stuck to the jersey, while the actual pieces that powered it have either shifted or broken down. Their offense without the main engine feels more like a car stuck in second gear. It still moves, but it does not roar. Honestly, that is the big emotional split here. Sacramento has already shown they can walk into a road gym and punch above their weight, putting up that kind of loud scoring night that reminds everyone they still have shot makers who can catch fire for an entire game. You see flashes, like that huge explosion from one of their primary scorers, or the way the bench guys refuse to pack it in even when the starters lay an egg. That we are not dead yet energy matters when you are evaluating which side is more trustworthy with points in their pocket. On the flip side, Indiana is dragging around a longer injury list and a more fragile identity. Important pieces are in street clothes, rotation guys are out or limited, and what is left often feels stitched together on the fly. There are games where the defense scrambles and makes plays, sure, but there are also long stretches where the offense looks like it is searching for a plan on every possession. When both teams carry bottom-tier net ratings, both sit in that negative double-digit territory, and one of them is being asked to win by multiple buckets, the so-called favorite starts to feel more like a label than a fact. Let me explain it another way. If you imagine these rosters with the names taped over, and you only saw recent form and injury notes, you would not rush to lay points with the more beaten-up unit. The Kings have ruled out Domantas Sabonis. Dennis Schroeder and Keegan Murray both sit on the injury report as questionable. On the other side, the Pacers have ruled out Quentin Jackson, Ben Shepherd, Aaron Nesmith, and Cam Jones again. Both teams have spent most of the year in a funk. Sacramento struggled through the first part of the season before that upset win over the Heat on Saturday. Indiana had its own cold stretch before picking up wins in 3 of the last 5 games. Trust is low on both sides. The Pacers open as slight home favorites, but neither profile inspires much faith right now. Backing the Kings comes with clear risk. They have trouble stacking wins, they have 10 road losses, and they sit at 8-14-1 against the spread for the season. That is not the profile of a steady road team. Even so, this version of Sacramento looks as healthy as it has been all year if Schroeder and Murray suit up. The win over Miami was one of their sharper efforts of the season against a team that punishes mistakes. Indiana still deals with a long list of injuries and does not look comfortable in the favorite role. This will be the 4th game this season with the Pacers laying points, and they have dropped 2 of the first 3 outright. Against the spread, they are 3-4 in their last 7 games as a favorite. So with a matchup between two struggling groups, one slightly healthier on the perimeter and shooting the ball cleaner from outside, and both buried in similar record holes, the points feel less like a trap and more like a reasonable shield for the road team that has already proven it can hang when the game gets tough. As our first pick for this matchup, the Sacramento Kings to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Now, shifting to the total, the number hanging out there in the low 230s looks like it belongs to a different version of these teams. On paper, with both squads hovering around that 101 possessions per game mark, you would expect fireworks, or at least that is the story the line is trying to sell. Two teams that can run, both in a rhythm, both filling it up. Sounds fun. The reality this season has been a lot more uneven, and honestly, a lot more choppy. Indiana, without its main offensive orchestrator, has gone from track meet offense to something more like a heavy-moving truck. It still gets up and down the floor, but the half-court possessions feel labored, like everyone is thinking half a beat too long. The offensive output sits closer to the lower half of the league. Three-point shooting is shaky, and a lot of possessions are leaning on one primary scorer to dig something out of a static set. That recent strong scoring night from their lead forward in a win, for example, came in a game that still finished comfortably below this kind of inflated total. The box score looks decent, but the pace and shot quality do not scream full-on shootout. Sacramento is not exactly lighting scoreboards on fire either. Their offense has lost that old turbo feel, especially when the hub that used to glue everything together in the middle is sidelined. They are still competent, still able to hit you with a big quarter, but the average result lands in that familiar low 100 teens range again. When a team that used to rely on dribble handoffs and flow suddenly has to rewire its approach, you often see more slow, deliberate possessions, more mid-range pull-ups, and fewer early clock, wide-open looks. Let me explain why that is such a big deal for the total. When both teams are juggling injuries, rotations usually tighten. Coaches lean on lineups they trust to defend and not implode, which often means more conservative offense, more time used on the shot clock, and fewer reckless transition pushes. You can still get one of those wild nights where a couple of scores get hot at the same time, and that can absolutely happen, but the broader pattern this season has leaned toward games that land closer to the low 220s than to the speculative offensive explosion that a higher number implies. You also see it in specific games. Sacramento gets dragged into a lopsided loss where their scoring just disappears after halftime, and suddenly what looked like a fast start turns into a grind. Indiana, on some nights, becomes a team that wins more through hustle plays, steals, and blocks than through pure offensive artistry. That kind of identity shift nudges games toward more broken possessions and fewer clean, high-value looks. It feels subtle, but it adds up. So when you blend two average tempo teams, both scoring in a similar range, both lugging around key injuries, and both showing more inconsistency than firepower, a projected total in the low 230s looks like it is pricing in an older, more glamorous version of these offenses rather than the current one. It is not that a shootout is impossible, it is just that the most reasonable expectation is a more muted scoreboard, something that lands a tier below what the line suggests. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Phoenix Suns versus Minnesota Timberwolves. Target center on a cold December night, two teams heading in opposite emotional directions. Minnesota comes in at 15-8, riding a 5-game heater and feeling pretty good about itself after edging the Clippers in a tight one. Phoenix sits at 13-10, still talented, but carrying some fresh scars from a rough loss in Houston and a string of recent bumps and bruises. The first meeting between these two was a one-point escape for the Suns, 114-113, even on a night when Anthony Edwards went off. So you know the Wolves have circled this one in pen, not pencil. Here is the thing. Minnesota's strength right now is not just one star playing hero ball. It is how steady they are possession after possession. They are sitting near the top of the league in scoring at just over 120 points a night, but they are not some chaos team sprinting around like a pickup run. They get to those numbers by being organized, running their sets, and leaning on a deep rotation that can keep pressure on you for all 48 minutes. You watch them lately and it feels like a slow squeeze, not a haymaker, the kind of game script that wears on an opponent that is already a little short-handed. Phoenix, on the other side, is trying to play big-time basketball with some key pieces sitting in street clothes. Devin Booker is out with that right groin strain, Jalen Green is out with the hamstring, and Isaiah Livers is out with the hip issue, while Dillon Brooks is hovering in that uncomfortable gray area of questionable with left Achilles soreness. That means a lot more responsibility on guys like Grayson Allen, Colin Gillespie, Royce O'Neal, Mark Williams, and maybe Brooks if he goes, and that is a workable lineup. It is just not the same offensive ceiling you get when Booker is orchestrating everything. You could see it in Houston, where the Suns managed only 98 points and shot under 40% from the field and barely above 13% from deep, even while grabbing a pile of offensive rebounds. Minnesota, meanwhile, is as healthy as a coaching staff could hope for in December. Their injury report is completely clean, even with two-way guys parked in the G League, and Chris Finch has basically the full board available. That matters when you are laying a big number because it is not just about the starting five, it is about whether the second unit can come in, keep the energy high, and actually grow a lead instead of coughing it up while the stars sit. This Wolves team, with Anthony Edwards, Julius Randle, Jaden McDaniels, Rudy Gobert, and Dante DiVincenzo setting the tone at the top, has that mix of scoring, size, and defensive length that tends to punish banged-up groups like this version of the Suns. The first meeting was razor-thin, but that one came in Phoenix with a healthier Suns outfit. Now the script flips to Minneapolis, with the Wolves in rhythm, 5 straight in the win column, and Phoenix searching for answers on a tough road stop. As our first pick for this matchup, the Timberwolves to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. On the surface, you see Minnesota scoring like a top 10 offense and you think fireworks, but context matters. The Wolves are putting up those 120-point nights while also holding opponents around 115, which is more solid than spectacular, yet the combination tells you they are very comfortable grinding out possessions in the half court and still winning the math. They are not trying to turn every game into a track meet. They are just efficient when they get their looks, especially when the game slows and they can play through their bigs and their main creator instead of racing the clock. Honestly, the Suns' situation nudges this total conversation in a pretty clear direction. Without Booker and Green, they lose a huge chunk of on-ball creation, pull-up shooting, and late-clock bailout shots, the exact stuff that pushes scores into those high totals. You saw the version of Phoenix that lives without those guys against Houston, where they managed 98 points with icy shooting from deep, going 5 for 36, and often looking like each possession took a lot of effort just to generate a decent look. Their season-long advanced numbers back that up too, hovering around 117 on offense and 116.8 on defense. A small positive net rating, but not some wild run-and-gun team that blows totals up on its own. Let me explain why that lines up with a lower scoring script here. When you are that short-handed on perimeter creators, you tend to lean more on sets, more on moving the ball side to side, and less on full-speed transition. Minnesota is not going to complain about that at all. With Gobert and Randle as anchors inside, plus length on the wings, the Wolves are built to wall off the paint, run you off the three-point line just enough, and then force you to eat clock hunting for mid-range answers. Every long, half-contested possession is another 10 or 12 seconds melting away without necessarily adding many extra points to the scoreboard. There is also the way this could flow if Minnesota gets separation. If the Wolves build a cushion at home, especially against a Suns group already stretched thin, the natural tendency is to shorten the game. You see longer, more deliberate offensive trips, more post touches, more late clock pick and rolls where the goal is a clean shot, not a fast one. Phoenix, trailing but tired from recent travel and leaning on role players to create, is not exactly set up to explode for some wild late comeback flurry. Instead, you get the kind of fourth quarter that looks like a slow fade, benches checking in, fans enjoying the moment, and the pace quietly dialing down even as the clock races toward zeros. When you put all of that together with a projected total sitting in that mid-220s range, it does not take a math degree to see how a slightly clunkier offensive night from Phoenix and a controlled tempo from Minnesota can pull this thing under that number. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. San Antonio Spurs versus New Orleans Pelicans. Odds makers are not exactly whispering about this one. San Antonio rolls in with a record of 15-7, sitting in the upper tier of the Western Conference, while New Orleans drags a 3-21 mark and the worst net rating in the league into its own building. The spread sits around San Antonio, favored by roughly 9.5 points on the road, which already tells you the market sees a pretty big gap in class between these two. Here is the thing about that gap. On one side, you have a Spurs team that actually knows how it wants to play already, which is rare for a group that young. They are living near the top 10 in offensive efficiency, scoring right around 119 points a night, powered by a structure that looks more like a veteran playoff team than a science project. Even in the stretch without Victor Wembanyama, when the temptation would be to panic and junk the system, they have basically kept the same rhythm, using De'Aaron Fox, Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, and a rotating cast of bigs to keep the ball moving and the paint under constant pressure. On the other bench, New Orleans feels like that friend who says they have a plan while their kitchen is full of smoke. Their offense scrapes together a little over 112 points per game, but their defense is giving up more than 122 points per 100 possessions, which is how you end up with a 3-21 record and a fan base checking tankathon more often than the standings. Coaching and context add another layer. The Spurs are being steered by Mitch Johnson, who stepped into Greg Popovich's chair and somehow managed to keep the whole pop-style discipline thing without killing the pace or the fun. They are 7-3 over their last 10, which says a lot about how well they have handled injuries, travel, and the occasional clunker like that loss in Cleveland. New Orleans, on the other hand, is being held together by James Borrego in an interim role after Willie Green was fired in mid-November, and you can feel that everything is temporary, energy and how they play. Rookies Jeremiah Fears and Derek Queen are being thrown into the fire. Trey Murphy III is basically the grown-up on the floor, and everyone else is trying to figure out who they are while the losses stack up. That is exciting from a long-term rebuild angle, but in a single game against a dialed-in Spurs group, it often looks like kids trying to out-execute a seasoned half-court offense, which rarely ends well. Honestly, the availability report only leans further toward the more stable side. For San Antonio, Victor Wembanyama is still out with that calf issue. Jordan McLaughlin remains sidelined, and there have been question marks around Stephon Castle and Luke Cornett with hip and ankle problems. Even with that, local reporting has their expected starting lineup as Fox, Julian Champagnie, Vassell, Barnes, and Bismack Biyombo, all of whom are firmly on the active roster and ready to go. That is a group that can punish soft closeouts, bully switches, and live at the rim when the defense starts to wilt. New Orleans is missing the three stabilizers who were supposed to give this roster a real offensive identity: Zion Williamson, Jordan Poole, and DeJounte Murray. And all of them are confirmed out for this one. Herb Jones sits in that gray game time decision space with his calf, which is not what you want when you are already short on defensive stoppers. So while the Pelicans do have intriguing pieces like Bryce McGowens, Yves Missy, Sadiq Bey, and those rookies, they are being asked to solve a problem that is usually handled by high-level creators, not kids still learning where to stand on certain sets. You can absolutely talk yourself into New Orleans making this awkward for a while. Home crowd, nothing to lose, younger players who do not know they are supposed to be outmatched yet, and all of that. There is always a version of this game where the Pelicans hit some early threes. San Antonio looks a bit sluggish after the road grind, and suddenly you are in a one-possession contest halfway through the third. That is the emotional side of the handicap that keeps people from laying a big number on the road. But then you check how the Pelicans defend for full games, not just for 10-minute spurts, and it is ugly. Bottom tier in defensive rating, bleeding efficient looks inside the arc, and regularly getting stretched out of position by teams that can keep their composure for 4 quarters. The Spurs happen to be one of those teams right now, even with key injuries. So the scenario that has this staying tight wire-to-wire requires New Orleans to play the cleanest, most disciplined game of its season against a structured, veteran-led attack, which is possible but not exactly the most likely branch of the tree. That underlying expectation that the disciplined group eventually stretches things out is a projection based on what both teams have shown through 20-plus games, not a guarantee. As our first pick for this matchup, the San Antonio Spurs to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The total for this matchup is sitting in the mid-20s across most books, roughly between 236.5 and 238, which is the market's way of saying we expect a track meet, maybe with some chaos baked in. Part of that sticker shock comes from recent box scores that have involved New Orleans. That overtime thriller against Minnesota where the numbers went wild. The one-sided loss in Brooklyn where they still gave up 119 in regulation. Those games leave a footprint in people's minds, and totals tend to drift upward when the last impression is no one guarded anyone. San Antonio's own profile nudges the number higher as well. They are putting up close to 118.9 points per game and sitting around 8th in offensive rating, which fits what you see when you watch them. They run, but not recklessly, and they do not waste many possessions on aimless isolations. There is a logic to how they attack, a steady drumbeat throughout the game, and that kind of structure tends to keep their scoring floor pretty high, even when the shots are not falling. So at first glance, pairing that with a Pelicans defense that has a defensive rating over 122 and regularly gives up efficient looks in the paint makes the over feel like the automatic fun side. Here is where it gets a little more nuanced. The Pelicans' offense, as currently constructed without Zion, Poole, and Murray, is not really built to keep up in the sort of non-stop shootout that a number like this implies. Their season-long average of about 112.3 points per game already lags behind league average, and that number includes healthier stretches when at least some of the primary creators were available. Right now they lean heavily on Murphy, Queen, Fears, and a mix of role players to create in the half-court, and that often results in long, clunky possessions that end in late clock jumpers. You saw a version of that against the Nets, where they finished with 101 points and went through chunks of the game where every possession felt like a chore. For a total sitting in the mid-230s, you need both teams to cooperate offensively for pretty much the whole night, and this Pelicans group has not shown that kind of sustained scoring consistency, especially against organized defenses. There is also the quiet dynamic that when a game tilts strongly toward one side on the scoreboard, it often drags the total in the opposite direction late. The team in front tends to slow things down, walk the ball up more, and lean on safer half-court actions instead of pushing it every time, and coaches use the chance to give bench players longer stretches. That does not mean the pace completely dies, but it often softens just enough to knock 10 points off the final total compared to what it felt like halfway through the third quarter. The earlier write-up mentioned a kind of example scoreline in the 122 to 108 range, and that is a fair way to visualize what a high-scoring but still under outcome can look like. That is not a prediction of the exact final score, only a speculative game script that lines up with the mix of one strong offense, one weak offense missing its main stars, and a point total that has crept up because of a few wild recent games. If you look at trend numbers, they are noisy but they lean in the same direction. Spurs games have gone over 12 times in 24 tries, which is roughly a coin flip, and Pelicans games have seen the over hit 14 times in 24 outings, helped along by those occasional defensive disasters. That history explains why the number is where it is. It does not guarantee that this version of New Orleans, with its current injury list and a rotation leaning so heavily on rookies and role players, can repeatedly punch above its 112.3 points per game baseline on demand. When you put that all together, the path where this game still has plenty of scoring but quietly sneaks in below a mid-230s number feels a bit more realistic than the idea of both teams trading haymakers for 48 minutes. That is an opinion based on current season stats and context, not a certainty, but it is a reasonable way to frame the total. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.